A New Menace by Henry Pratt Fairchild. Beginning about 1882, a marked change in the situation began to develop. Certain new streams of immigration, which had hitherto trickled in almost unnoticed, began to swell to portentous proportions. Foremost among these were the currents from Italy, Austria-Hungary, and the Russian Empire and Finland. Streams smaller in proportion, but of immense volume in the total, came from various of the Balkan states, Portugal, Turkey, Greece, etc. Even after they began to increase, these currents remained below the older ones for a number of years. Italy, which had never sent more than 9,000 before 1880, in that year raised its contribution to over 12,000, and in 1882 sent 32,159, a very considerable body of people, but quite trifling compared with the delegations from the United Kingdom and Germany. The movement from Austria-Hungary, previous to 1880, had reached about the same maximum as that from Italy. But in that year, it rose to over 17,000, and 2 years later to over 29,000. The Russian Empire still lagged behind, sending only 16,918 in 1882. What I'm talking about, folks, is, well, let me give you a brief insight or a brief overview. It's one of the truly great epic things of American history, right, is the movement of people to the United States from all over the world. Between 1820 and 1859, more than 40 million persons migrated from other lands to take up residence in the United States. Among the great nations of the world, the United States is preeminently a nation of immigrants. Anyway, now let's get back to where I was. The Russian Empire still lagged behind, sending only 16,918 in 1882. But it is not necessary for present purposes to make a detailed inquiry into the causes of the sudden expansion of these streams. The development of transportation facilities by land and water, the spread of popular education and geographical knowledge, the extending reputation of the United States as the land of promise, and the gradual development of the spirit of independence and initiative among the peasants of Southern and Eastern Europe all played their part. The important fact is that, having once received the impetus, these streams continued to grow until in a very short time they dominated the situation. As the new immigration increased, the old immigration diminished, not only relatively but absolutely. The records set by the United Kingdom, Germany, and the Scandinavian countries were never equaled again. The definite turn of the balance came about the year 1896. From that time on until the outbreak of the Great War, a larger and larger majority of the total flow was claimed by the new immigration. In 1914, the old immigration amounted to only 13.6% of the entire number. It seems evident that forces were at work which, if they had not been interrupted by the war, would in a few years have reduced the old immigration to almost zero. The question of immediate interest is, what was the racial significance of this radical change in the sources of immigration? Were the immigrants of the past generation simply continuing to rebuild the American population along the original lines? Were they notably altering the proportions of the racial composite? Were they introducing some entirely new elements? The answer to these goddamn questions is to be found in the racial composition of the people of the countries of Southern and Eastern Europe, a most baffling field of investigation to be sure. Let's get rid of the cod American accent. No, goddammit, let's keep with it. The outstanding feature of the racial situation in these lands is the very small proportion of Nordic blood represented in their populations. This by itself means that immigration from these sources tends inevitably to reduce the Nordic proportion in the American population. In its place will be substituted primarily Mediterranean and Alpine elements. Can you believe this bloke? This would have been an important fact in itself. I mean, he's from that area when everyone was into eugenics and totalitarianism and the science of, what do they call it, phrenology and measuring the head and all that kind of stuff. You know, let's get back to it. Right, this would have been an important fact in itself, but more was involved than that. Eastern and southern Eastern Europe have been the scene of a long series of innovations, coming in general from the east. The best known of these, probably because the most spectacular, is that of the Huns. But there were several others much more fateful as regards the racial makeup of the region than the Huns. Prominent among these are the Avars, the Bulgars, the Magyars, and the Turks. Without attempting to go into the complicated and somewhat obscure history of these movements, it appears that many, if not most of them, had their origin in that remarkable Turkey or Tartar stock, which has contributed out of its abundant fecundity to the population of so many remote regions. In other words, he's saying they fuck a lot. All right. This stock appears to be essentially Mongoloid in its racial affiliation, so that the lands which were the immediate sufferers from these invasions, can you dig it? So that the lands which were the immediate sufferers from these invasions must have received important permanent additions of Mongoloid stock. However effectively, the fact may be concealed by the processes of race mixture and the modification of cultures. It follows that immigration from these regions has the effect of introducing into the American population considerable strains of Mongoloid germ plasm. Just how extensive, no one can tell, but certainly sufficient to be of great importance. He goes on, this is Henry Pratt Fairchild. A further factor to be considered in connection with the new immigration is the Hebrews. Right? To just what extent the Hebrews are to be considered a race, it is impossible to say. There is a marked difference of opinion not only on the part of non-Hebrew students, but also of many leaders of Hebrew thought. This would drive you mashugana. Anyway, let's carry on. Their remarkable combination of culture and religion, or culture dominated by religion, with its restrictions and prescriptions, and their remarkable faithfulness to these restrictions have perpetuated a degree of inbreeding which has kept them related in kin to an extraordinary extent in view of all their manifold wanderings and vicissitudes. Yet it is inconceivable that in the course of all these wanderings and residence in various lands, there should have been no admixture of blood, and it seems quite certain at times numerous outside groups have been Judaized. Fucking hell, man. As a whole, one thing at least is sure. The great bulk of Hebrew immigration in recent years has been from Eastern Europe, so that's the pogroms, you know, Russia and white Bolsheviks and all that, you know, tradition. See Fiddler on the Roof with Topol, man. You get a brief history of all that. Anyway, they all started changing their names, like from Finkelhorn and Finkelstein to Pharrell and stuff like that. Anyway, let's go on. Eastern Europe, so that if it is not actually a separate race, it is definitely affiliated with the new immigration. The conclusion is that beginning about 1882, the immigration problem, his words, in the United States has become increasingly a racial problem in two distinct ways. First, by altering profoundly the Nordic predominance in the American population. And second, by introducing various new elements which, while of uncertain volume, are so radically different from any of the old ingredients that even small quantities are deeply significant. Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! This guy's he's a qualified bloody racist, man. Anyway, a somewhat vague but widespread and rapidly growing popular appreciation of these facts contributed largely to the general support of the immigration law of 1924. Eternal recurrence, how history repeats itself, the Weimar Republic, xenophobia, left versus right, reds versus blues, Guelphs versus Ghibellines, anarchy in the streets, predict a riot. Anyway, we go on. How are we doing for time? Oh, shit. Right. A new problem of group unification, therefore, was created by the typical immigration of the last generation. Instead of facing national complications alone, the United States was confronted with the additional problem of race mixture. To get even a partial idea of all that this involved, it is necessary to consider in some detail what the nature of race mixture is and what results may be expected to follow when numbers of persons representing two or more different racial stocks are put in close territorial contact with each other. Need I say, this fucker goes on like he's straight out of the eugenics handbook.